on that.
Okay, well, if anyone does want to come in, if Deirdre, can you call them in by name?
I'm just see if I can distinguish. Unfortunately, it's just because there's such a large group, the hand is raised. So maybe if anyone does have a comment at this point, if they would like to come in on mic.
Will I say the names are coming up, Deirdre and Walter?
Sure. Yeah.
I have Louise Kane. Oh, okay. I'll just take down your hand then. Okay. Is this Jean Cunningham? Your hand is up. No. Okay. I think that's it. They're the only two. I'm just going to lower the hands if. Yeah, I think they'll just put up an error, Walter.
Okay, all right. So just a few other house rules to enable or to facilitate the network and not overburden it. If you could keep your cameras and mics off unless you're speaking. So it's particularly the mics. I'm not so concerned about the cameras, but to reduce any feedback and so on, keeping mics off until you need to use them would be good. If you want to ask a question or make a point, just use the hands up feature, and some of my colleagues will be monitoring that, and we'll make sure that you get the opportunity to speak. When you do, just make sure to identify yourself, your name and your provider, and that way we can build up that community. There's also, in addition to verbal interaction, you can also use the chat in Teams, so you can either pose questions or make comments or suggest answers to other people's questions or whatever. So don't be afraid to use the chat facility. We will also put things into the chat if they're relevant to the topic being discussed. So we are now going to start dealing with some of the questions that have been sent in by people in advance. And we've tried to group them together by topic. And what we'll do is I'll give an initial answer. And if needs be, I can offer to the person who raised the question, whose name is shown, if they want to add to or expand on, or they want us to expand on the answer. So the first one is from Joe McHugh of the Food Safety Professionals Association, but this is a topic which is of relevance to all providers up and down the country. It relates to the mitigation measures that QQI approved last year to allow providers to basically have approval to run their programs online as a result of the restrictions that are imposed nationally. And the last version of that approval was due to expire on the 31st of August this year. And I can say in relation to the question posed that as of last week, has been extended for another year. So there will be continued approval to providers or for providers to extend their scope of provision and their validated programs to include online delivery and assessment. Now it's an emergency measure. It's not indefinite, but it has been rolled over for another year in recognition of the fact that a lot of providers are planning for September intakes to cover the year ahead. So we do have to allow for that. So Joe, I don't know if you're there, but does that answer your question?
Yes, Walter, thanks very much. I think that's a big help to all small providers in the current climate.
Okay. Has anyone else any comments on that or questions? Okay, that's good. Another question from Mary McLaughlin of Healthcare Training Solutions is, what supports are you going to offer to providers for the application process to get blended and online programs validated post these pandemic measures. Now, we're very conscious that the methods used and the systems developed to deliver programs online or blended, they're not going to go away just because the pandemic ends. There's learner demand, there's provider demand to continue this method of delivery. But there will be an end to the blanket approval for those measures to apply. So we do have to have a process of validating programs and approving providers QA to operate in this way into the future. And we do have to, as part of our role, we do have to provide guidance on this. So in relation to the specific question, Mary, we are going to be developing guidelines for online programs. Now, I have to say there are existing guidelines for blended programs, which are very relevant and very helpful for providers developing their QA. They set out the things you need to think about and refer to, so I would certainly use those already. In relation to fully online, we currently do not validate programs for fully online provision. It's only allowed on an emergency basis, and we will have to produce guidelines for those type of programs, and we will be working on those and piloting as part of that some programs of a particular type in FE and HE. So we will be seeking to offer guidance to providers who do want to offer this type of program in the future. Mary, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, Walter, thanks very much. It's just obviously, you know, it's a concern that we have with the pandemic. We've very quickly been, you know, transferring our onto online blended, and it's just once the pandemic is over to be clear on what will be expected of us. So there's just to be preparation really in my head really as to know that this is coming down the line. And you're right, actually the blended guidelines are excellent. So yeah, perfect, Walter. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Mary. And it's worth making the point that it will be an expectation for programs developed for blended and online that they are not just the same programs translated, if you like, to in this way to PowerPoint or to just via Teams or whatever. They are meant to be different programs, the way that the information is designed and structured and delivered and assessed and so on. So we will be conscious that they are different programs requiring different QA. Does anyone else want to make comments on that or ask questions on it?
Walter, Nicola has her hand up there.
Hi, Nicola.
Hi, Walter. Nicole from iSchool here, just for anyone else on the call. Just with regards to the online guidelines, we've been running obviously as a blended centre for quite a few years now, and our provision was probably one of the few that wasn't impacted by COVID. So with regards to when QQI is coming to the development of the online piece, we'd be very happy to kind of give our input on that piece if QQI is willing for any input from our organisation, just to kind of put that out there.
We'd be very happy to take any assistance in that regard. Really, what we want to do in these guidelines is capture existing good practice. There are providers who have experience in this area nationally and internationally, and they know where the strengths and the potential pitfalls are. And we want to learn from that and build it into guidelines for other providers to use in the future. Thanks, Nicole. Anyone else?
No other hands, Walter.
Okay. Moving on.
Sorry, Walter. One is just Andrew.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Andrew Finn here from FIT. Just a quick question in that space, and I think it's kind of an interesting one. I suppose from our perspective, with a few validated programs, and when we're looking at the blended piece and particularly the QQI blended learning guidelines, I suppose we're very much looking at our kind of teaching, learning, and assessment strategy, and I suppose looking at those guidelines, and I suppose formulating ways that we can marry one with the other as successfully as we can in terms of what will end up a great experience for learners. But potentially over time, it might be great if we could kind of see an example of where that's been done very well, if that makes sense, in terms of how providers are pulling all that together in terms of documentation for yourselves.
Yes, I agree. Andrew, we do have to draw on good practice, identify it, and where possible, share it. Anyone else? Okay, Deirdre, I might ask you to answer on this one. It relates to re-engagement.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Deirdre Stritch, for those who may not know me already. I work with Walter in the QQI Awards unit, and I'm manager with responsibility for QA approval. So re-engagement obviously falls within that. So this question in from Columba was around blended learning approval as part of re-engagement, although actually I think the question probably applies for any of you who might be seeking to have your blended learning policies and procedures approved as a separate piece later on as well. And the question was, do you need a specific blended learning policy, or can you incorporate all of your blended learning into your other QA statements? And then there's a second question, and that is, where should the policy appear in the manual? Can it be an appendix, etc.? So the first piece to say is that when you are applying for engagement to QQI, it is entirely up to you to decide how you want to structure your QA manual, or indeed your QA documentation. And you'll be doing that in the context of what makes sense to you and your organization, to your staff primarily, and also to your learners. There's no right or wrong to it. Typically, most providers will structure the documentation as a single manual with a table of contents that clearly guides the reader through it. And all key policies will be located within that. And given that if you are offering programs via blended learning, or you're intending to do so, it makes sense, therefore, to include your policy on blended learning as one of the policies within that. If you are going to be delivering or intend to deliver via blended learning, you will have a policy which will set out your overall approach to blended learning, your strategy, etc. Might set out information on what technologies you're using, etc., etc. That is likely to be a standalone document and therefore be situated as one of the policies in your manual. In addition to that policy, you are very likely to have a range of other procedures. So procedures around teaching and learning. So as Walter said, your blended learning programs won't simply be a replica of your face-to-face programs just being delivered via Zoom. There will be some modifications to take into account the fact that you're not going to be meeting with your learners, etc., and the particular needs of learners in a blended or online environment. So you'll have procedures around teaching and learning, around assessment, around data, GDPR considerations in a blended learning environment, and so on. You can choose to have separate discrete procedures for all of those that deal with the blended piece, or if it makes sense, you can interweave that into your existing teaching and learning strategy, into your existing procedures around assessment, etc. There's no right or wrong of that, and it will really depend on what makes sense in your context. Are you, primarily face-to-face and you've got a little bit of blended? Are you, where does the balance lie? So essentially, there is no right or wrong on it. It's up to you, but we would strongly encourage you to have a discrete, separate policy on blended learning, and then how you work with the procedures will be up to you and your individual situation. I'm just seeing, is there a comment coming in on that? Sorry, yeah, so Marie, my colleague, has just dropped a link into the chat there to the blended learning guidelines, and we have some resources up on the QQI website as well, and we'll drop the link to that into the chat also. Any other questions on that? I see Dennis has popped into the chat. Dennis, I'm going to see if I can read this out. So you're saying that based on your experience of coming re-engagement, the important aspect was the coherence and the connectedness. So Dennis, did you want to say something on that, maybe? Not to put you on the spot now or anything.
No, but you've just done that, Deirdre. You just put me on the spot. We were through. Look, we've done blended learning for probably 10 years or thereabouts, and And I guess like many others, we developed it on the fly a little bit, and originally, and but to be honest about it, going through the re-engagement process was a really positive experience for us. Sorry, I should say I'm with the Irish College of Humanities and Applied Sciences in Limerick. It was a really positive experience for us. Now, the one thing that I would strongly suggest, and I've suggested to QQI, is that a blended learning expert on a re-engagement panel is really helpful, because, or indeed an online expert, and we had the benefit of that. Now, she put us through our process, and she made us justify, and she made us think very clearly and very coherently about what it was and why we had things in place around the quality assurance of specifically of blended or indeed online components of assessment or engagement or teaching or whatever. And as we went through the process, then I guess coming out the other side of it, that notion of making sure that there is a coherence and a connectedness. Sometimes Walter's correct. It's not just a case of banging up a few PowerPoints and and away you go. And I don't think that anybody thinks that that's the case, but it is not that. And it is that notion of making sure that there's a cohesion and a connectedness. But it was, I must say, for anybody who hasn't been through it, our experience of it, and I think it was largely because we had the benefit of having been through, I'm like an online expert on panelists with us, and it was really positive experience. My apologies, but it was. But to me, that's the biggest thing, Deirdre. But I don't think it's anything for people to be afraid of.
No, absolutely not. And Dennis, thanks for that. And you're right. There we will have a blended learning expert. If you're applying to have your blended learning policies and procedures approved as part of your re-engagement, there will be somebody with expertise in that area on the panel. And as Dennis noted, their feedback can often be incredibly valuable to an organisation.
Deirdre,
Thanks,
Anne
Deirdre.
has her hand up there.
Sorry, okay.
Anne, if you have your hand up. You want to come in? And do you want to come in? Okay, I'll lower Deirdre.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks, Alex.
My name is Antumi Deirdre. I'm the Adult Ed Coordinator in Northwest Secondary School. So it's just a little query as to the question you have up there. I was just wondering, in relation to like ourselves, a small provider who obviously I would prefer 100% face-to-face engagement, and as Dennis said there, I thought it was very good, the fly-by-night that we were all trying to, fly by the seat of our pants with the online stuff. I'm just wondering, in terms of re-engagement, if your main drift is towards face-to-face education, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll all get back to that, and your blended learning is really a backup, do you know what I mean, in terms of if this all happens again, hopefully it won't, but if it did, does it still require, as part of your engagement, a specific blended policy, or is it your backup policy, if you're getting my drift? I'm not formulating it very well now, but I'm thinking.
That's grand. I know what you're saying. It's your contingency plan, essentially.
Yeah.
Thanks, Deirdre. You're okay. There's no obligation to submit policies and procedures for blended as part of re-engagement. It's there as an option really for those providers who've already made a strategic decision that post this whole pandemic situation, exactly, that this is something they're going to want to stick with. This is part of their strategic planning long term. It's their business model, etc. So no, you don't have to go down that route if you feel it's not something that's going to suit you long term.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Deirdre.
No
Appreciate
problem.
the response. Thanks.
Yvonne Moriarty, if you want to come in there.
Just a query, and I don't know whether I have my information right or not, but VTOS have been given, well, my friends in VTOS have been told that VTOS is going to be bound down over the next 2 years and that all learning is going online. That's what they've been told. So, I mean, if they're delivering from QQI level 3 up, and surely they'd want to be talking to you if that's what they're intending on doing.
I have, Walter, have you heard anything on that?
No, I haven't.
Paul
VTOS.
Patton has his hand up, Walter. He might want to something on
that. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Just clarification on that, just from Yvonne there. Yes, the evaluation for VTOS was published there in late 2020, and VTOS as a programme is to be phased out, but there is no alternative to moving VTOS online. So that part of it is not correct. So, but the program itself is planned to be phased out.
Okay, maybe I'll just come in on that briefly, just to distinguish between VITAS program and a QQI program. The program in the context of VITAS is a funding program and a funding stream. It's really adult education funded through the ETBs. It's one strand of funding, but it's covered by a range of different QQI programs. So if the VITAS funding program is withdrawn, it doesn't mean that the adult education programs currently delivered through VITAS won't continue to be validated and won't be available to the ETBs to deliver in some other way to adults. So that is something that will be at the discretion and control of the ETBs in relation to what they deliver and how they deliver it and so on. But just one point in relation to what Dennis said about blended learning experts and what Nicole had previously said about iSchool. Another way that iSchool and others can get involved and contribute their expertise is to maybe be volunteer to be part of expert panels. So we are very conscious that we do need, as Deirdre said, the relevant expertise on any re-engagement or validation panel. And people with expertise of online learning and blended learning in the FE sector and the quality assurance of same, we would be delighted if they would maybe share their expertise through working on panels, because it, as Dana said, it makes the process much more relevant and much more useful. So if anyone feels that they could contribute and would like to, they should contact us. Okay.
Sorry, Walter, I might just add one little note, and I'll drop it into the chat for anyone who's interested in a second, just so you know that for all of the providers that have had their QA procedures approved already, we publish the reports of those evaluations. They're on our webpage, and I'll drop a link into that in the chat in a second. But the providers themselves are also obliged to publish their approved QA procedures, including their procedures for blended learning. So you'll see a list of those providers up on the webpage, and you can then go to their websites and have a look at their QA procedures in any of these areas if you want to have a sense of how other providers have approached this issue.
Thanks, Deirdre. The next question is something similar. It's from Eileen Sorhan and Bordis Kiwara. And it's about, in the long term, extending the scope of training provision to incorporate blended learning, and how much changes can be made to a validated programs in terms of digital supports before it is considered a blended learning program. Now, just on that basic topic of blended and the difference between a blended learning program and a face-to-face program, if you like, with digital supports. There are virtually no program now where there isn't some element of online communication or access to resources. So nearly every learner will have either be referred to websites for reading, or can submit assessments online or whatever, or can get access to previous notes and lectures that are made available. That's all using digital supports, but it's not necessarily blended learning. Blended learning is where necessary parts of the program and participation in the program on the behalf of a learner requires at least some online. You can't do it without going online. It's not just there as an additional resource or support. It's where the learner has to go online to participate in some way in the program. So that's how much a program has changed, if you like, if it becomes necessary rather than an optional resource and support. And when you do make it necessary, then you have to consider, how do you do that in the best way? and how do you support the learner to do it, and how do you ensure that the learners you have in your program can access the necessary parts which are online. So it's a blended learning doesn't necessarily just mean having access to notes and materials and so online. It is a part of the conscious design and delivery of the program. Carmel, I don't know if you want to talk about that from a validation point of view.
Sure, thanks, Walter. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carmel Kelly. I'm Manager of Programme Validation with QQI, working with Walter and Deirdre and the team. So yeah, I suppose with regard to validation of programmes for blended learning, we see applications coming in with varying degrees or amounts of face-to-face and online portions. So we don't have a strict ratio or percentage of what is appropriate to be delivered face-to-face and what is delivered online. It's up to the provider, I suppose, to look at the programme they're proposing and decide and determine themselves in terms of the application for validation, what is the appropriate blend for face-to-face and online, and propose that in the document. And then the evaluation panel or the independent panel that evaluates the application will look at that and see if it is proposed in an adequate way, if they feel that the blend is correct, etc. So yeah, we're seeing more, I suppose, applications for validation coming in, maybe with either both modes where providers are applying for a face-to-face version of the programme and also a blended learning version, or providers applying purely for blended learning programmes at this point. But the blend is that there is some face-to-face and there is some element of online instruction and learning, whether that be partially synchronous, you know, where the learners tune in and go online at a specific time, or whether there are recordings by tutors or lecturers, or what it might be. I see there's a hand up. Maybe there's a question on that from Karen Moore.
Yeah, Karen Moore from Longfield Westmeath ETB. I suppose to meet us through the interim, the temporary modifications and looking towards a blended learning or online platform, our original premise was to look at modelling the CDETB approach, where they're using a 1/3 model, but they're using their governance structures at a centre level, at an ETB level, to be able to manage those programmes instead of having to revalidate. Is that something that you would recommend as an interim, I suppose, measure before kind of looking at the bigger picture and validation for ETBs as a whole in relation to blended or online?
And maybe I'll come in on that. This period where you have, if you like, blanket sanction to deliver in a blended or online fashion, it's necessary, but it's also an opportunity. Mm-hmm. Designing programs and designing QA for such an altered situation can't be done, if you like, out of the blue. It has to be built on knowledge of what works, what doesn't work, what learners have said, what staff have said, and what has collapsed and what has gone really well. So in many ways, this period of enforced provision does allow providers to build up incrementally, particularly QA, and particularly the QA of the program development space, if you like. How do we design programs to be delivered online that will be effective, and how are we going to manage them then? So I would be saying to not only ETBs but all other providers to not waste this opportunity. If you want to make the transition in the longer term to blended provision or online provision, then be building your QA as you go. identify, as I say, what works, what doesn't, and how you'd know the difference. Who do you ask? What do you look for? That's all about QA. And what will you know to do the next time you're designing a program that you didn't do the first time, based on your experience of that. So I would say to the ETBs, whether it's collectively or individually, it is an opportunity to build that QA framework particularly. And it is around largely that teaching and learning that was talked about earlier. How do we design a program to be delivered online, synchronous or asynchronous or both, which is effective and which can meet the needs of our learners? And how would we know what works and what doesn't work? So I don't know if it's answering your question, but in this period, that is when the QA infrastructure, program development infrastructure, and governance infrastructure should be incrementally built up, so that when the restrictions are lifted and you want to do this for the long term, you know you're not starting from scratch. You've captured the learning and you can use it going forward.
I definitely think it is something that we're building on at the moment. Our knowledge base has been built hugely compared to where we were before. The quality network we've discussed at the quality network for ETBI, we've discussed on numerous occasions about, our approach going forward for future. But for this interim period, and then the modifications, the temporary modifications to last up until August 2022, we're looking beyond that to be able to provide that service, but maybe for some courses as an introductory for that 1/3 or kind of like that ratio type of thing at an ETB level. But it is a bigger conversation about blended as, an ETB approach and the knowledge that we're gaining at that moment with this situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and the ETB, I'm sure Paul and others will say it as well. Because of the diversity of provision and programs and learners that are within the ETB remit, it will be a range of approaches, I would imagine, and a range of different teaching and learning approaches which are required. So it's not underestimated the work involved in building this framework. So I would certainly acknowledge that, but I do know that there is a lot of work going on which will feed into the longer term, because some form of this is going to be the future. Eileen,
Thanks.
I don't know if your specific question was answered.
Hi, Walter. Yes, and Carmel, thank you. I think that has answered my question. I'm interested, Carmel, you mentioned there would be two distinct programs possibly. So you might end up having face-to-face program validated and a very different program for blended learning validated separately.
Yeah, Eileen, so often what would come in as a program, as an application for validation, would contain both. And that would be, if the intention was to have two versions going on, then that would be the smart way to do it, to send it in as a single application, setting out what the face-to-face provision program looks like and what the blended learning program looks like. There could be two distinct groups of target learners, one which suits the face-to-face model, one which suits the blended. So it depends. Some will come in only, some applications will be only for face-to-face, some will only be for blended learning, and some will be both.
So when the program has already been validated, then it would require a completely new validation for blended.
So yes, it would need to be submitted and identifying what the differences are. So if the curriculum is the same, if the assessment is all the same, all of the elements of the program, identifying what is changing, under the blended learning mode, and then we'd look at that and see what type of an evaluation was necessary for the programme in the blended learning mode.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thanks yourself. Paul has his hand up there as well.
Yeah.
Hello, Walter and Carmel there, and just following on from what Karen said, has QQI a preference that the ETB sector would go together? That would technically be the 16 ETBs going together and submitting a blended learning policy for validation, or is it acceptable that each individual ETB would go on their own? Because some ETBs are at different stages in terms of their development of blended learning frameworks and policies and procedures.
That's a tricky one. QQI, if you like, will work with providers as they present. There are a lot of advantages, both from the provider end and the QQI end, if there is, if you like, coordinated and collective development and implementation of whatever it is, programs or QA policies or whatever. So there's a great multiplier effect if it's developed once, then you use multiple times. Having said that, we do know that within the ETB sector there are various speeds of operation in terms or development in terms of these things, and some want to drive ahead and some want to wait and have other focuses at the moment. So we will work with whatever the sector presents, but we will always encourage and see the benefits of coordinated development, because it's more efficient. Like, we'll talk about the early learning and care program later on, whereas instead of 16 providers, 16 ETBs developing and getting validated a program from scratch, it's validated once and then shared, differentially validated the other 15 times. So that's efficient, more efficient for everybody. So, but we realize that takes a lot of coordination and a lot of agreement, so we can't dictate that.
Okay, thanks, Walter.
Does anyone else have questions on remote learning and issues arising from that?
Chris Callahan, you have your hand up?
Yeah, hi Walter, hi Carmel. It's just in connection, you know, as I said, we have a difference between the ETBs and the independent providers. You know, it's really a difference of scale, less people to do the jobs and less resources. But just coming back to the validation, and you were just mentioning, Carmel, you know, about the validation and the difference between a class-to-class, basically a class-to-class program, and a blended learning program, and i.e. the other version being the one that's been spoken about and probably being used this year, the online version as well. We have been looking at this over the last year, but one of the biggest issues that we're finding is you can't just have three different versions of, if you've got a subject matter, you've got it covered. You know, the subject matter, we have to develop the subject matter that's appropriate. And really, if we're delivering it in different environments, you're talking about using different technology in some cases, and they're kind of add-ons and caveats to the program rather than re-ramping the whole program to suit a set environment, because the learning outcomes are still the same. It's just a different environmental delivery model. So just, you said earlier on about I understand at the moment the issue is validating basically separate elements, but has QQI got any vision going forward that it's more around the validation or the, let's say, the development of the program as an overall that can be delivered, i.e. in different delivery modes? So I'm really talking about, sorry, just Carmel, just last thing, I understand fully that the quality assurance has to be written specifically to cover all those elements, and that is a job in itself. But it's just to cut down the time for, because to develop a major award is to do it comprehensively takes a long time, and then to get it validated, as we well know, it takes a long time.
Yeah, well, I suppose for the programs to be delivered in different modes, that needs, you know, how the material and how the curriculum is delivered to learners between face-to-face and online will vary. So in terms of, as you say, different platforms being used, different teachings modalities used online versus face-to-face. So that all needs to be set out in the program application document for the proposed program.
So it's possible to submit a validation that has all those appendices to it, you know, to describe all the different delivery modes. And I understand the panels will go through individually and have to cover that according to the quality assurance that also accompanies the validation application.
That's right. Yes, yeah. And then you'll have like the schedule for the program will set out face-to-face, how many classroom hours, how much independent learning on behalf of the learner, how the assessment is the assessment is set for the program in that mode, and that might change then under if it's a blend with online and face-to-face. Obviously, it will change, that there'll be fewer face-to-face classroom hours, there'll be more online, and identifying what mode that is. Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? And how assessment is done then remotely, if it's being done remotely.
Yeah, that's grand, Carol.
Thanks, Chris.
Anyone else? Colette Horgan, Walter.
Hi, Colette.
Hi, Walter. Colette Horgan from the Chris Me Group. I would just be interested to hear, have you got a time frame in mind for when you'd have those guidelines, and when then would you be expecting applications for the validation of the blended learning programs? I just imagine that by August 22, you don't want to be inundated with loads of applications, you know, so we'd have to have them in well in advance before.
Yeah, well, first of all, on that, QQI, I think, is realistic and pragmatic around having to deal with the situation as the world presents itself. So, in relation to the guidelines, that's a project which we are now started on. So our aim is to have those guidelines certainly delivered this year and available to providers as soon as possible, obviously, because we're conscious of, from all points of view, the need for these and the need for providers to be able to use them to develop for the longer term. So that's our plan. We will be doing pilots this year on selected programs with selected providers that already have QA approved and expertise in the area to go through the validation process with them, if you like, and see, well, what in this program description helps, what is maybe irrelevant, what's necessary, what QA do we need to describe. So we're going to learn a lot from the application of this two particular programs to see what are the essentials for these guidelines that every provider needs to build in. So, as I say, we're going to do some action learning through actual validations of programs from experienced providers, as well as research and consultation into good practice nationally and internationally. So we're not going to be inventing anything that is brand new. Like we don't claim to have that. We are going to be building on the experience and drawing on the experience and expertise that is already there, and trying to package it into guidance available to our providers in a way that can be applied within our processes. So The short answer, as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
And can I just pop in there as well? Colette, were you referring to blended learning guidelines there?
Yes, specifically. So I suppose, you know, we have approval at the moment under the current circumstances.
Yes.
But that will be expiring in August 22. But so if we want to continue to deliver, we obviously need to be approved well in advance of August 22.
Yes, yeah. So just to follow up on what Walter was talking about there. So we have the blended learning guidelines are there for the approval of blended learning and the provision of programs that have a portion of face-to-face and online. And what Walter was referring to about the new guidelines we're developing is for purely online program delivery. So there's just two separate things there. So, you know, if you were looking at down the road beyond 2022 and you look at your suite of programs and you say, OK, we've learned from what we've been doing fully online in the past X number of months. But actually, what we would like to have is programs which are partially face-to-face, not as much as we had previously, but some face-to-face element and then some online. So you could apply for those at the moment for delivery in that mode. If you looked, you know, if your strategy was as a provider, that's what we want.
My mistake there, apologies. I actually meant to say fully online.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Okay, you're talking about fully online. Well, that's what Walter addressed there. Yeah, fully online programs, QA guidelines for those and approval of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if other providers are out there who say we're not going to be a fully online provider post this pandemic, we want to have face-to-face elements to our programs, but we would like to utilize the technologies and deliver some part online, then you can apply and you can line that up now. You know, the guidelines are there for blended learning, and you can apply for validation of such programs blended.
Yeah, once your QA for it is approved. So if you've completed your re-engagement and you weren't covered for blended as part of that, you were approved for face-to-face only, you can apply to have your scope of provision extended to include blended, and we'll do a kind of a smaller evaluation just looking at your blended learning infrastructure, and assuming you're successful as part of that, then as Carmel said, then you can start applying to have blended learning programs validated.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Quick question there from Karen Jones, National College of Ireland, asking, will QQI panels continue to be virtual after the pandemic? And I would say that yes, at least some of them will be. We have found that the process works very well virtually. That there will be some occasions and some applications where we would probably use a traditional face-to-face meeting. But in the majority of cases, I would imagine the default will be a virtual panel. Anyone, any questions on that?
Eileen has her hand up. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, this is just a quick one. I think if they were to remain virtual, then there would be really a great opportunity to bring in more international representation on panels, because that is a current deficit if we're trying to align nationally and internationally.
Agreed, Eileen. Yes.
Yeah, so in terms of panels at the moment, we do have some international representation on occasion when for particular subject matter areas or where there's a recommendation or we know of somebody internationally. On the validation of HE programs, when they're level 9 programs, master's degrees, there's definitely an international representative on those panels. And as I say, on other panels, we also sometimes have on occasion, but yes, for sure. Virtual meetings allow for a lot wider engagement, and having panel members come from abroad and join panels remotely is a big advantage.
And again, I would make the point about people maybe considering taking part in panels. It's a great way of sharing your expertise, but also gaining expertise and awareness of QQI policies and processes, and also learning from the other members on the panel. So I'd encourage people to consider that as a way of feeding into the sector.
Walter, just there's a question. I don't know if Mark Byrne wants to come in. He just put it into the chat. So I'm just going to put it up for you.
And Alex is another one before that from Tony.
Oh, is there?
CSE. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to do them or go to what you have in the PowerPoint. So
no, I go.
Okay, I'll
take
just
them now.
Sorry, Deirdre, who's the other one?
Sorry. First question is from Tony at ICS.
Tony.
Walter, and it says, will awards which are currently due for deactivation also have their lifetime extended for the duration of the emergency measures? So I was following on from you were talking about the current extension of scope being continued.
So who's that from?
Tony at ICSE.
Tony at ICSE. Okay, it's deactivation of awards in FE is under the control of the awards and standards section within QQI, and it's generally based on two criteria. One is if they've been replaced by newer standards, or two, if they've basically fallen out of use for certification. So if there are any, there won't be, they are not affected, if you like, by the pandemic mitigation measures. So if there is any award that is to be deactivated, it's for one of those reasons. And if there's a case to be made for retaining it, you need to make it to the awards and standards section within QQI.
Okay, this is second question, Walter. It's from Mark Byrne. It's he was wondering if there's an update on the Sectoral Convention 3 in assessment and standards, honours classification or any classification higher than pass shall be based on first attempt grades.
Yeah, that is to go to the Policy and Standards Committee. It is, we have researched or canvassed all of our HE providers, and it's fair to say there is a consensus that that convention is probably dated, and we are comparing that feedback with practice in the other public HEIs to ensure consistency across the framework. So there will be a paper going to the Policy and Standards Committee at its next meeting. The paper isn't done yet, but it's likely to recommend a change. But as I say, it's not finalised as yet.
Okay, no further questions in the chat, Walter.
Okay. This topic here is very current for a large sector of the FET space, and it relates to what used to be called early childhood care and education, the major awards at level 5 and 6. They're now being replaced by new standards at levels 5 and 6, with the move to not only new standards but a whole new program and award structure. So we are moving away from the old CAS award structure, common award system, to basically a new award created through validation of the program. So it is a major change, and it's likely to be a model for other future changes in the FE space to try and make the award standards as relevant to all stakeholders as possible. There was a lot of involvement of the employer sector, practitioner sector, and regulator sector in the development of the new standards and the model for the new program. So as the new standards are introduced, the new program is validated and rolled out, it will mean that over time the existing awards will be deactivated. Now, we are very conscious of the number of providers that are offering these awards currently and the number of learners who are doing them. So there is a lot of consultation with the sector about this, and there will be further. So we have a number of questions in relation to it. Firstly, from Patricia Howland in CTEC in Wexford. When will the new award come into operation? And can QQI guarantee that providers who have a long history of successfully delivering the old ECC awards will be able to deliver the new award? Now, just to give a quick overview of that, the model for the new system, as has been set out over the past couple of years, is that there will be a national curriculum developed and submitted as part of a program for validation by a lead provider. So that means we have one provider who is developing the curriculum based on the standards. The standards are quite detailed. So the curriculum will be built and based on that, and a program submitted for validation as the curriculum would be delivered in that provider. Now that provider is Dublin Dunleary ETB, and as part of an agreement within the ETBs, to which QQI was a party as well, all of the other ETBs will share that program and will seek validation just on a differential basis, i.e. just those ETB specific elements of the program, which centers and so on. So the plan is that first program from DDL ETB and all of the other ETB variants will come in for validation in April. That is the current plan. And it's hoped that the program will be validated in time for students to start on the program in September. So that they will be the first students who will be on a program leading to the new awards. Now, the program will be a 2-year program leading to a level 6 with the level 5 major award available after 1 year. So the first awards are due to be offered to those students on those programs in 2022, all going well. Now, in parallel to that, the idea is that the curriculum will be as nationally consistent as possible. In other words, there has been a demand from all sides, from regulators, from employers, from practitioners and providers, that there be as much consistency as possible in how the program is delivered and structured across the country. So QQI has been promoting the notion of sharing as much as possible the program with all providers seeking to offer it, but each provider would have to get it validated for their own use. So now, again, just as I mentioned earlier, we cannot, if you like, force that. It may be that individual providers may have to develop a version of the program themselves and submit it for validation. But as soon as that first program is validated, we will be in a much clearer position as to the sharing of it. The initial sharing is with other ETBs, and we hope that it will be shared much more widely to facilitate as many providers as possible to use that curriculum to submit for validation. So we will seek to ensure, in answer to your question, Patricia, we will seek to ensure as much as possible that all providers who are currently offering the old awards will be able to deliver the new award. But in between, there will have to be a program validated, but we will keep those old awards available for an agreed period of time to ensure that providers have time to do that, and also to enable their learners to complete any programs that they start out on. So that was a long answer to a short question. Does it deal with your question, Patricia?
Thanks, Walter. It does to some degree, but I suppose there's no guarantee in it for us. My fear is that this goes to the ETBs, and reading the information to date, it looks like it's a full-time program, which for a lot of our learners wouldn't be appropriate. They come and they do evening courses, they do daytime courses. They would not attend your traditional ETB program of 5 days a week. And I think that's a backward step. I do welcome the whole notion of a curriculum, a shared curriculum. I think that is an excellent idea. And I think from a standards point of view, that is to be welcomed.
Thanks, Patricia. Points noted. Pamela, you had a similar question. Pamela Latimer.
Yes, hello Walter, thank you. I would echo what Patricia just said also. All of our learners are part-time learners, typically attending 2 nights per week. Some of them are coming in at various stages. They may have some modules complete with other providers. So the motivation and the requirement of the learner is that they have a much more flexible learning environment. These learners are not typically in a position to go into full-time education. We also work a lot with CE schemes. Again, CE participants are working during the week, 19.5 hours, and then typically studying outside of that. So it's while I welcome the new standard in many ways, the structure in which this full-time 2-year program, that's going to prove a huge difficulty. It will eliminate an awful lot of people if there isn't an option for part-time education in it.
Thank you, Pamela. Does anyone else, maybe on the ETB side, want to comment or say anything on this?
I see Anne Ganley has her hand up there.
Good afternoon, Anne Ganley, Moat Business College. I'm just wondering, like, for the DES providers, where do we come in, or when will we know if it's going to be shared with us? How far down the line until we know how we go about doing this? Because we are offering both level 5 and level 6 at the moment.
Yeah, we're currently in discussions with the ETBs about how and where the program will be shared. They're very conscious of the effort and resource and time and money expended in the development of the program, and while they are anxious to ensure that the program is available, they are going to prioritize, I suppose, in fairness, those who contributed. Now, I don't have a chronology, if you like, in answer to your specific question, Anne, as to when they will be available. But QQI, in negotiation with the ETBs, is seeking to ensure that the program or the curriculum is available as widely as possible, as soon as possible. Now, we'll also have to allow for providers who want to press ahead in their own right to do so, but they will have to follow the same standards as are published. So it is in everyone's interest that the new program, new curriculum, and the work that has gone into it is made as widely available as possible. But there's a limit to how much we can dictate that. Anyone else have views on that?
Walter, I see Karen Higgins has popped a question into the chat there in regarding the ELC awards as well, and she's saying when When would you envisage that private providers would need to begin the process of using a shared curriculum to develop ELC awards for validation? And until that happens, will we be able to continue to offer the ECCE CAS award?
Yes, you will be able to continue to offer the CAS award for a defined period. Carmel, I think you have the deactivation dates that are currently planned. There will be a communication to all providers. There was an abortive one this week, I think, which frightened the life out of a lot of providers. But that was an incorrect email, which we apologize for. But there will be a correct communication setting out the timeline for deactivation.
Yeah. Yeah, Walter, thanks. So I suppose we are very conscious that it's at the early stage. The first program, which Walter talked about, that is being developed by the ETBs, hasn't been submitted for validation yet. We're liaising with the ETBs on it, and it's expected in soon. And as Walter said, they are hoping, all going well, that it'll be validated for a September 2021 delivery start time. So the ETBs have looked at, a deactivation schedule for them according to that sort of a time frame, the program starting in September 21 and then looking beyond that. But obviously, as people have brought up here as well, the modular structure and the various types of learners who are engaged in the previous version of the program and all of that. So we are conscious that there are old programs there which are being run and which will continue to be facilitated until such time as we have the shared curriculum, we have the program available for all providers who are interested in providing it, that everybody has an opportunity to come in for validation of those programs. So, when we look at, we haven't got a defined deactivation schedule as yet. The one that's published on our website is one that was envisaged pre-pandemic, and that is obviously changed entirely. And as Walter said, we're looking at that, and we'll get a communication out to providers very soon. But you can be assured that there won't, we're not going to pull the old ECCE and deactivate those programs without giving providers ample time to complete the learners that are on them, prior to having the opportunity to have the new programs validated in their own right.
Thanks, Carmel.
Rachel Tucker, you have your hand up there.
Hi, thanks. Rachel Tucker from CTEC in Wexford. Just before you leave this, I'm just wondering, in relation to gaining permission to roll out these programs for other centres from their local ETB, as part of this process, will there be a kind of defined set of criteria that providers have to meet that perhaps could be published in advance, so as private providers can prepare then for their application to run the programs? And also, I was interested to know, the new program, is it purely classroom based, the validation, or will it be blended online, or do we know yet? Thank you.
So if I take the last part there, Walter, sorry, in terms of the mode of delivery, Rachel. So the application that's coming in is for face-to-face classroom, your typical classroom provision. It was debated among the ETBs, and as we heard earlier in this session, ETBs are at different ETBs are at different stages of engagement with providing programs via blended learning. So they decided as a group to just submit initially for face-to-face. Provide, and it's a big job, I suppose, to get this level 6 program validated for the lead ETB, and then the differential validation for all of the other 15. So they said they take it in chunks. So the first part is apply for validation of a purely face-to-face program, hopefully get it validated across all of the ETBs, and then they look at the next stage of, do we want to do some of the centres, some of the ETB providers want to deliver it via blended learning as well, and we'll look at that next phase 2.
Just in answer to the first part, Rachel, I think community providers and in relation to Anne Ganley, your question, schools within an ETB area I would strongly suggest that you start, if you haven't already done so, communicating with your local ETB about access to the programme material. To start having those conversations as soon as possible. I'd recommend that, because I know that there is certainly a willingness within the ETB sector to share within their remit where possible. So now, obviously, I can't make commitments on behalf of any ETB, but I would certainly encourage that discussions to be initiated. And just on the face-to-face versus blended versus classroom, I would say that yes, the focus is on face-to-face, but not necessarily just classroom. There's a lot of workplace-based learning involved in this program, built into it from the beginning. So while it may be face-to-face, certainly there'll be a high proportion of workplace learning. And that may suit some of the part-time learners who are working as well. If they're working in the childcare sector, they may be able to engage in the program while attending classrooms on a part-time basis, if that makes sense. I'm just conscious of the time and the fact that there are other topics coming up, so I'm just going to move on. This is a quick one from Kevin O'Shea in Kilkenny Carlow ETB in relation to the use of QHub. He's specifically asking about training for or briefing for ETB staff on how to use QHub for program validation. But the issue is equally relevant to other providers. So we will be offering sessions like this, taking people through the process of applying for validation on QHub. So we will be in touch with you about that, and we will offer that training. Validation, we'll probably have to, I don't know how people feel. It's now 10 to 4. There's still quite a lot of questions. So it's scheduled to finish at 4. I don't know how people feel about moving on, or maybe we'll go through the answers more quickly. If anyone has any thoughts as to which approach.
Walter, I think there are a few validation questions that probably won't take very long to get through on the next couple of slides. So if we wanted to.
Okay, I'll hand it over to you. So, Carmel.
And Carmel, just to say as well, on the re-engagement side, I know there's a few literature. We are putting an FAQ together, which will be out within a few weeks. So that will also be available if we don't get to all of those today. And I'm happy to follow up with anybody who had specific questions.
Great, thanks Deirdre. Okay, so we'll just go through these couple of questions quickly. So revalidation of programs that were originally approved by FETAC but have not been revalidated with QQI. With states on the website, revalidation is not yet an established process. What is the requirement now in relation to the status of these programs? Okay, so it's true, we don't have a review and revalidation process in place for further education programs. What we are seeing and what we are encouraging providers to do is, if within their suite of programs they want to amend or change or provide new programs, that they submit those for validation. Or if there are existing programs which you feel are beyond their shelf life and need to be modernized and amended to suit provision in the 2020s, then feel free to submit those to us for validation. So it would be new program validation at that stage. I suppose we have a huge number of FET programs on the book, and we're encouraging providers, if they want to refresh them, just to look at the QQI FET validation page, find the program, the descriptor for submission of new program validation, and complete that and submit the programs for validation of new programs. And then the second one there, is there a difference in fees? Well, there isn't revalidation for FE programs, so it would be a new validation fee. The validation of new programs is for programs of less than 60 credits, it's €1,000, and for greater than 60 credits, it's €2,000. So those are those two. Walter, if you wanted to go to the next one, thank you. I don't know if Joe is still on the call. That particular question about GDPR, I didn't, if you wanted to say exactly what the issue was, Joe, I didn't get exactly what the issue might be. If you're still there, Joe McHugh.
Yeah, sorry. It was just a lot of small providers are in competition against one another, and I know the atmosphere is to try to share everything, but there is still a marketplace out there in competition. So how do you go about finding out the staff profile of other providers in a competitive environment? That's where we were going.
Okay.
When you're trying to benchmark staff profiles as requested in some of the guidelines on the self-evaluation process.
Okay. Walter, you had mentioned something, I think, earlier.
I think, first of all, in the GDPR, we're certainly not asking providers either to give us or to search from other providers personal details of any of the staff. We literally do ask for the profile. So if you're employing somebody as a tutor or an instructor, what is the qualifications and experience that you would be looking for in such an appointment? And that comes in as part of a QHub application for validation and will be published as part of the certificate of validation for that program. So a certificate of validation is, if you like, what's agreed or what has been approved when that program was validated, and that will include a summary of the staff profiles for the different roles within the program, and that information is publicly available. So if you do want to check that out, you can look at certs of validation. Now, having said that, the amount of validation happening in the FE sector of late has been very little. So they're very old programs, as Carmel said, and I would encourage providers to look at the potential to refresh, renew the program. There's a new validation policy. A lot of you have already gone through re-engagement, so it is an opportunity to renew your programs, submit the new version for validation, and that will generate these certs of validation as well. So to give to let your program be out there, if you like, in terms of what it does and what it offers.
Okay, thank you. That's much clearer. Sorry.
Thanks, Walter. Then there are two questions relating to protection for enrolled learners, what needs to be in place, and then a question around duration. So protection for enrolled learners needs to be in place if learners are paying to take a course, take a program, to enroll on a program, and also if that program is longer than 12 weeks duration. So they're the two parts. So if you provide a program and there's no learner fees for it, then Pell doesn't apply, or if it's shorter than 12 weeks duration, Pell doesn't apply. So if learners do pay fees and the program is longer than 12 weeks, Pell needs to be put in place for the program. There are a couple of options and they're outlined on our website. I think Marie has just dropped them into the chat there. Thanks, Marie. And we have a link on the website explaining what the requirements are. So basically there are two avenues. There's academic bonding or there's financial bonding that can be put in place for the program. Academic bonding is where another provider or two other providers that provide similar program, you create an agreement or an understanding between the providers that they will take on the learners on the program if anything happens to the provider for which the program is validated. So that's one route with academic bonding. And then the other one is a financial bonding, which a lot of providers go for as well. So there is an insurance policy available. It's not available right at the moment, but it probably will be reinstated shortly. But it's an option there in terms of setting up Pell via an insurance company, which undertakes that if a program is discontinued, a provider can no longer ceases to trade, that then the learners can be compensated for the fees that they have paid for the program, which they have lost out on. So that is Pell. And the second question there is, if all your programs have a duration of no more than 10 weeks part-time, do you need protection for learners in place? No, you don't. In that case, the regulation is programs of longer than 12 weeks duration.
Sinead, sorry, Carmel has her hand up there. Sinead, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Hi. So can I just ask, in relation to PEL there, if we've got a course that is funded by Springboard, so there's no fees coming from the learners, but it receives the funding, does that count towards the fees needing PEL, or does it not count?
Walter, I'm not wholly familiar with the Springboard funding stream, whether that would still be Pell.
Yeah, well, technically it's where the fees are paid by or for a learner. So my understanding is that, yes, there would need to be Pell where it's Springboard.
Okay, thank you.
Dennis has just popped in the chat there. Don't think they have been subject to Pell. So we can check out that one in particular, Sinead, anyway, with regard to Springboard. We can let you know specifically in that case. So generally, the programs which, for example, ETB, programs provided by ETBs are not Pell. They don't require Pell to be in place. But we can check that out and get back to you.
Francis Kelly, you have your hand up.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Francis Kelly here from the International School of Business. I think there was talk at some stage in the not too distant past of QQI offering some form of national bonding system rather than us having to approach private providers like O'Donnell and O'Neill. Has there been any progress made on that?
Yeah, you're right, Francis. That is part of the legislation, and the new minister for oh God, I can't remember the name of the department, but it's basically Simon Harris. He is keen to get a number of elements of the legislation which hadn't been commenced. One of them is that Pell scheme. So our colleague Mary Sheridan is in consultation with the department about that. There's a number of other things that will also hopefully be commenced under his support, but it is the sort of thing that will require government funding and a budget. It is where basically the state will underwrite a fund. So we would all much prefer that system, believe me.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, anything else? Okay.
No, there's nothing else there, Walter.
Yeah. Okay, this is another question, validation related from Katie McMenamin. It's relating to ATP, access, transfer and progression. Does a provider need to have specific arrangements in place with another provider to allow learners entry to or exit from their programs? Or can a learner avail of ATP from any provider as long as they meet the criteria set by each provider for their own programs? So access, transfer and progression is a section on the program descriptor, which the provider completes for when they're applying for validation of their program. So it should identify what are the access routes, what particular qualifications or experience or under what circumstances people can access the program. Transfer options should be identified as part of it, and progression. They don't need to be formally set in place with the providers that you think the learners could progress to or transfer to, but it's just that they are considered as part of the application, and that provider looks out there and sees what other providers are providing similar type programs, or what are the opportunities for learners when they complete the program, that it isn't a dead end and that there's opportunity for them to continue in their learning in the particular field, if they wish to do so. So that's how they are set out. So it doesn't need to be specific arrangements in place, no, but just that they are some possibilities are identified in the application.
Sorry, Carmel, just on that point, just in case there are a few people from the apprenticeship side on it, it is slightly different for apprenticeship, where they would need to have had that conversation with the relevant provider. So just for those people that are on the for apprenticeship side, you would need to have had that conversation, because it's on and off the job training. It's not a traditional face-to-face training program in the sense of what the FE and HE would provide. It is different. Okay, sorry.
Okay. No, that's perfect. Thanks, Alex. Great. Okay, so I think that's okay on that one, unless there is any other question around ATP.
Okay, I'm conscious that a lot of people have moved on, seeing as we're reached the time of 4 o'clock, which was agreed. That's fine. I think we can continue for those who are able to continue. There are some questions on re-engagement. We can, as Deirdre said, there is an FAQ document which she will be circulating, which we can incorporate some of these questions into, but we can certainly continue for another 15-20 minutes anyway, if people think it is worthwhile. So those of you who need to go, thank you very much for attending, and we hope it was useful. Any feedback you have, we'd be glad to have it, and we'd like to know how to make these as useful as possible. But for those who can stay, we'll continue for another 15-20 minutes.
Walter, just a question in the chat from somebody who needs to leave, and they were saying just what is the point of contact for follow-up if you have clarifications on any of the queries that arose today?
They can send they have my email, so they can send them to me and we'll consolidate them.
Thanks, Walter. I'm going to go because I wanted to pop into a virtual site visit before it closes out today. So thanks very much, everybody. And thanks, Walter. That was great.
Thanks,
See you all soon. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Carmel. So we have a few re-engagement ones here. I'll try and go through them quite quickly, but I'm happy to follow up with anybody afterwards or by email or whatever who might want to have a more detailed or in-depth conversation on any of these issues. So the first one, and I realise this probably deserves a whole conversation unto itself, but anyway, we'll see how quickly we can deal with it. And that is, can a community group, and I assume that means a community provider, re-engage under an ETB? So in relation to that, I know that a number of providers out there, private providers, community voluntary providers, have existing relationships with their local ETB. That may take many forms. They may be in receipt of supports or resources of various kinds, maybe training hours, maybe funding streams, etc., etc. And any of those providers, as they're preparing for re-engagement, they are welcome to engage in a conversation with their ETB to see whether any of those supports could be formalised. And I'm thinking things like perhaps support with programme development, that kind of thing. That could be formalised. And so when QQI and the panel are evaluating the providers' QA procedures, they could then take into account the ETB support provided in that area, for example, as I said there, around programme development. Now, obviously, we don't mandate that this is purely assuming that all parties are mutually agreeable to that, but certainly it's a conversation that's worth having. Some providers will decide as they're preparing for re-engagement that actually, you know, it's not in their or their learners' best interest to continue with QQI directly. Maybe the volume of activity is too low, etc. And so they might decide that actually they would prefer to become a second provider to their local ETB or indeed to another provider. And again, that's a possibility, assuming all parties are agreeable. And then in that instance, what would happen is it's not that you would be re-engaging under the ETB. The direct relationship between QQI and that provider would cease, and the program and QA relationship would move to the first provider. So in this instance, in the question, it's an ETB. So the ETB would own the program, and as a second provider, you would then be delivering some or part of that program on behalf of the ETB, and you would fall under the ETB's quality assurance procedures. So the direct relationship there then would go on the program, and the QA would be between QQI and the ETB, and you would be acting as a second provider. So it was Elizabeth McDonald who asked that question. Does that address what you were coming at there? Maybe Elizabeth has left already. We're after 4. Okay, well, hopefully that addressed it. And if anyone else had questions in that area, hopefully that comes at it. Does anyone else have any questions on that? Okay, so the next question then was around, will there be any presentations on how to approach re-engagement? So the short answer to that is yes. So we already have a couple of briefing sessions, peer learning events, as we're calling them, in early May. I think it's May 6th and 7th. The invitations for those are already out. So that is for those providers that are scheduled to re-engage in quarters 3 and 4 of this year, 2021. We will be holding 2 full-length morning sessions on the re-engagement process. We'll go through everything that's required. We will have an experienced panel chair there as well to talk to you about what it is that panels are looking for when they're evaluating provider procedures. We'll have a provider representative there that's come through re-engagement, so they can share their experience, tips and pointers on what they would do better or differently if they were coming through again, etc. So we hold those twice a year for future applicant providers, and those are invite events. So they're set up on Teams like this, and you'll receive an invite usually about sort of 5 to 6 months before you're due to submit your application. It might be in the chat already. If it's not, we'll drop it in. We've had a number of these already, and the presentations that were made at those have been published to our re-engagement webpage. It's at the bottom of that page.
I think Marie has put them into the chat.
Excellent. Okay, so those are there for anyone who wants to have a look at those. The next question was, we have just updated and finished our QA manual. Do we still need to do a self-evaluation report? And then when do we need to submit the forms in? So as part of your application for re-engagement, there are really only 2 things that you need to submit. One is your application form and the supporting documents required with it. So that's, financial compliance documents, insurance documents, etc. And then your actual QA manual, your QA documentation. I assume when you're referring to a self-evaluation report that you may be referring there to the gap analysis tool that we make available. So when providers are preparing for re-engagement, we have developed a gap analysis tool, and that's designed to assist you in identifying those areas that you need to work on or to develop in order to ensure that your procedures are compliant with the guidelines. The outcome of that gap analysis is purely for your benefit. It's for use within your organization. You don't need to submit it as part of your application. So that's it. It's just your application form and your QA manual. That's all that needs to come into us. As most of you will be aware, because we've sent out the schedule for both this year and next year for re-engagement, you will have been assigned to a quarter, and you should submit your application at the end of that quarter. So the question was around Q3, so you'll be submitting your application at the end of September. So what will happen, and this applies to anybody in every quarter, you will be contacted by QQI about sort of 5 to 6 weeks before before the end of your quarter, reminding you that the deadline is coming up. And then in the coming weeks, you'll receive information from us on how to upload your documentation. It doesn't come in via email. It goes into a shared space. So you'll receive instructions on how to do that, and you'll receive your invoice. So end of each quarter, and you'll be contacted by QQI. And I see this.
There's a question, you probably have it, Deirdre. If engagement is scheduled for the next year, can we attend to earlier sessions this year?
So there will be, so for those providers that are scheduled for 2022, there will be a session this October that you can attend, and that will be by invite. The sessions in May, I'm pretty sure, are full already with the Q3, Q4 providers, but we will be making the presentations from those sessions available, and I'm happy to share those with anybody who is interested. The other thing is, of course, we're always happy to meet with people. So if a provider who's scheduled for next year is already doing work and has questions or would just like to talk to us about the process, I'm more than happy to do that. So just actually, maybe Walter, we might add a slide at the end of that with our contact addresses maybe or something, but I'm more than happy to chat with anybody who would like to. Okay, so this one is challenges during the gap analysis and identifying and mapping process for a small organisation, small number of staff, and a lot is happening intuitively or informally, or it's not recorded. So any workshops or info. So I think the second part I've addressed. Yes, there are workshops and info. Those are those briefing sessions that providers are invited to. Attendance at those, I should say, is not obligatory, but it's strongly advised. And we would advise senior managers to attend those as well, so that it's really important that there's a whole of organisation approach to the re-engagement process, that this isn't something that's assigned to a single individual and given full responsibility for it. This is an organisational QA system, and it needs buy-in and support and understanding from all staff within the organisation. But then coming back to the first part of this question, yeah, look, it's very likely in a lot of providers that there is a tremendous amount of really good work going on day to day, but a lot of it isn't documented, as has been noted here. It's happening informally. People have been doing the role maybe for a long time. They know instinctively what needs to happen and they do it, and it works. What we need to ensure through this QA evaluation process is that a lot of that really good stuff that's happening is formally captured and that it is documented, so that if, God forbid, in the morning there was a big staffing change, staff were unavailable or left, etc., that there can be continuity of practice and that there can be consistency of programme delivery and supports, etc., for learners. So it's important that all of that stuff that's happening informally, that's happening intuitively, etc., is collated, is documented, and is set out, and that everybody understands what needs to happen. And if there are new staff members coming in, if there are changes in staffing or somebody needs to leave suddenly, the whole system doesn't collapse. Any questions around any of that?
Sorry, Deirdre, if I could just come in there.
Yep.
Just in general, for small providers going through re-engagement, we're very conscious that a lot of the providers coming through now and recently have been small FE providers. In the vast majority of cases, you've been doing what you've been doing for a long number of years and successfully. But what we're finding is that where it's small, where the provider is small, there is the potential for if you like, some element of isolation, and maybe not the range of redundancy, if you want to put it that way, in terms of cover to address all of the sort of things that are needed for a QA system and a program development system and a delivery system and an assessment system, and all of the things we've talked about through the session. Being a provider offering QQI national awards isn't easy. Like we're very conscious of that. There's a lot of stuff involved. And when you talk about QA for blended learning and online learning and development of the material and approval that it's okay and somebody to check that it's okay and so on, it is difficult. And I just want to acknowledge for those providers who have gone through already and who are trying to struggle with the sort of issues that Owen has come up with here. It is difficult, and we're not going to say it's other than that, but there is a logic to having some of those structures and certainly the documentation that Deirdre has talked about there. Another element that is important, and I would encourage you and to use maybe events like this and others to try and make links with similar providers who can give you that element of externality that is important. It is good to work with other providers. It is good to benchmark against them. It is good to see how others are doing the sort of things that you do and to show others how you do it and share expertise. And that notion of the quality committee or the academic group is really to have a structure whereby you can have that element of externality. Somebody informed, somebody with expertise from outside who you can tap into and who can look at what you're doing and say, yeah, well, that makes sense, or no, that won't get through validation, or whatever. So, and I suppose it's just to take this opportunity to say that it is difficult. There are things that you will need to do. Documentation is definitely one of them. But building linkages and building externality is another. And I would just say that to small providers. We haven't had any provider yet who hasn't got through the process. I'm not saying it's impossible by any means, but it is more difficult for small providers. And I just want to say that.
I see. Is it Chris? Chris O'Callaghan has hand up.
Yeah, Deirdre. It's as I said, just to let other providers know, especially small providers. An awful lot of us are open for people to get in touch with us. Yes, we've gone through the process, and we're still on a learning curve, even years after going through the process. It's an ongoing thing, and it is difficult, but it's nice to talk to people who have gone through that. But there is some of us out there who have a very much of an open door policy where possible. Can't solve everybody's issues, but we're certainly there to talk to them. So as I said, NCU training, as Walter was known, we've had that policy for a long time. And if anyone wants to get in touch with us, it's certainly with me. There's no problem there whatsoever.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's great. Eileen, I think, do you have your hand up too?
Hi, I'd like to say the same thing, been through it, although I'm now an extremely small provider. We definitely would be able to reach out, or if people want to reach out, just to look informally at documents and things like that, because, creating this collegiate atmosphere among the private providers is incredibly important and very useful. And I've benefited from myself by just reaching out to people, rather cheekily in some cases, but I always get a response.
Thanks both. Yeah, thanks to both, because that is very welcome, and I think will be hugely beneficial to other providers. And just in saying that, I just mentioned there about accessing other providers' documentation and seeing how they've done something. I did mention it previously. We publish the reports, and I did drop that into the chat earlier. But providers themselves who've come through the process must publish their own approved QA procedures. So if you have a look around the websites of providers that have come through, see how providers have approached the different areas, maybe areas you've had challenged with, and reach out, as Chris and Eileen have said, and make contact with other providers. There could be huge benefits to doing that. So the next question was around advice on the re-engagement process for providers at levels 1 and 2, and that was from Matthew Ellis. I'm not sure, Matthew, if you're still here, were there particular areas that you were concerned about, or areas that you thought might be particularly challenging for you? Maybe Matthew has left already.
No, he's there. Matthew, do you want to come in? You're okay. You've just gone to mute. You're unmuted. I don't think we can hear him. Okay, well, Matthew, if you want to, maybe if you're having difficulty with the mic, feel free to type something into the chat, and I'll try and pick it up. I think a lot of the issues sometimes for providers around levels 1 and 2, and Matthew, I don't want to put words in your mouth or make any assumptions about St. Joseph's, but it can be that it can be sometimes about scale of activity, it can be about levels of resourcing, etc., or it can simply be that sometimes the scale of activity
you know, may raise questions about the benefits of going forward with QQI and so on. So I think some of what we've said already in terms of talking to other providers, talking to your ETB and seeing what resources and supports can be drawn upon as part of your preparation. Yeah, actually Matthew is saying that we've addressed a lot of this already. Okay, very good. Yeah, I think it's probably a lot of what has been covered in the response to some of the previous questions. But Matthew, again, happy to pick up with you directly if you'd like. So the next question was around where is revalidation of programs at? Is it a possibility that once re-engagement is successful, we would have to revalidate within a certain time frame? So I think as Carmel and Walter mentioned earlier, that isn't currently a requirement, but it is certainly a possibility that in future it may become one. We have seen in a number of individual re-engagements where conditions of QA approval have been imposed that a provider might put forward some or all of their programs for validation post approval of the QA. It's a good way to test out, to trial run these new QA procedures, because in the vast majority of cases, they're hot off the press. People have done a huge amount of work in terms of restructuring, reorganizing their QA system, you know, developing new policies and procedures for re-engagement. They haven't been tried and tested yet. Oftentimes, existing programs may have been on the books for quite some time. They may need changes and updating as well. And so putting those programs forward for validation, either de novo validation or revalidation when it comes down the line, is a good way of putting your QA policies and procedures to the test and seeing do they work in practice, do they need further tweaking, and that's fine. There's no sense that once you have your QA system approved that it's set in stone. It's a living thing, and we understand and we expect indeed that it will continue to enhance and develop as you implement it. So it's not an absolute strict requirement now. It's sometimes a suggestion or indeed a condition arising from re-engagement, but it is possible that down the line it may become a requirement, because there are significant benefits to providers in doing that.
Yeah, I echo that as well, and maybe even encourage providers who are starting on re-engagement to do the two processes in parallel, or at least look at, like, if I'm designing a new program that I'm going to run, how will I know that my QA is relevant to it? And the best way of doing that is to develop a new program or a revised version of your existing one as you're doing your QA. Let the two grow together so that they integrate properly and make sense. And then if your re-engagement is successful, you have a ready packaged program to submit for validation afterwards. So I think that's a very good idea.
Okay, that was from Imelda. Imelda, do you have any questions on that?
I think Imelda's gone.
Imelda's gone. Okay, very good. And then I think the next one, Walter, you were going to. Yeah,
this is from Eileen in Bordiscawara. It's around reasonable accommodation, and that's a phrase that goes way back, and it's basically it relates to particularly assessment. How can you reasonably accommodate a particular person's context in modifying the assessment? So, for example, I was just thinking of this earlier when looking at your question. I was thinking maybe of learners on one of the BIM programs who might be people whose original language is not English, whatever language. And they might be working on a boat and being trained in very specific marine-related activities, maybe very skills heavy. In that case, it is certainly reasonable to adapt the assessment in terms of maybe using a reader, maybe using a writer. And the benchmark to keep in mind is if, in that case, the thing that's been assessed is not their reading skills and not their writing skills, but their inability to read or write in English is restricting their ability to demonstrate what is being assessed, then it is reasonable. So I hope that makes sense. But there's an element of judgment here that a provider has to make in doing the assessment. And the emphasis is on reasonable, but it's reasonable in the context of what am I actually assessing here, and does my accommodation, or can my accommodation be neutral in that assessment while allowing the assessment to happen. So I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Walter. Yes, I had read some publications from other training providers that they said it specifically excluded English language. That was really why I raised the query.
Well, no, I would not exclude that. If certainly for a lot of assessments which are where you're not assessing the person's English language skills, I see no reason why you shouldn't adapt the assessment medium to accommodate them.
And to follow on, I guess, provided they meet the minimum entry requirements then in relation to language?
Yeah, if there are entry requirements in relation to, well, if the medium of instruction is all going to be in English and participation in the program requires a certain level of proficiency in English, then yes, that should be in your entry requirements, and you shouldn't let people onto the program who don't meet those entry requirements. So it does fit together.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay. And the last one, you'll be glad to know, is around, again, it's an FE question, and it relates to external authenticators, which in HE speak is external examiners. And to put this question in context, came from a number of sources. Traditionally, or in the past, QQI and FETAC maintained a panel of people who acted as external authenticators for various subject areas and discipline areas, and providers could call on those people to come and act as EA for an assessment period. Currently, that panel has been wound down, or has been wound down in effect, and such providers are struggling to find people, or that the range of disciplines covered don't suit what that provider is currently doing or wants verified. So to be clear, the QA of assessment requires that a provider's own QA include a process for selecting and appointing and informing an external authenticator. So you cannot rely any longer on the QQI panel. And in a way, it's liberating in the sense that it allows providers to identify authenticators with particular niche subject matter expertise, which they may not have had available on the QQI panel, but which is required for their program. Now, as with all other such processes, that needs to be quality assured. So there needs to be a process for selecting such a person, ensuring that they have the requisite knowledge and expertise, and then that it's approved through their quality panel or quality committee or academic council or whatever it is. So it is part of the QA process, and that's part of the provider responsibility. But it is liberating in the sense that it allows you to tap into expertise around assessment work which mightn't have been available in the past. So I think that is it. I'm going to just offer a final opportunity for any questions, but it will be very limited now at this point. But if there's any pressing questions that somebody has wanted to ask and hasn't had an opportunity, now's your opportunity.
There is one there, Walter. Oh, it's gone from hold on. Sorry, there's others coming in, so it just moved up on me. Oh, I can't see it. Sorry. It was about to get to do with the EA. Yeah, are you allowed to use the same EA how many times? From Margaret.
Yeah, this is part of the provider's own policy on external authentication. So how many times, it depends on the frequency with which you use them. Now, there's the guideline in the QA guidelines was that you don't use them 3 times in any more than 3 times in succession. It's important that you refresh that role. Now, sometimes providers are having learners for assessment every period. So 3 times in succession might be 3 months. In another case, for a provider that's assessing much more infrequently, it might be once a year, and then 3 times in succession is 3 years. It is exactly the sort of thing that needs to be considered and systematized within the provider and approved as part of the provider's QA. But just to keep to the logic, is this person coming too often, and is the relationship getting too cozy and too stale? If it is, we need to refresh, get somebody new.
Margaret, you had your hand up there. I just lowered it.
Thank you for taking my call. One question I'd like to ask. On the panel for the re-engagement, is there any staff from QQI on that panel?
Hi, Laura, this is Deirdre speaking. Typically, no, there isn't. There will be somebody, if it's an online event, and let's face it, I think for the rest of this year, that's likely to be the case. There will be somebody from QQI there on the day of the meeting between the panel and the provider to provide technical support and assistance to, to facilitate the flow of the day between the individual meetings, etc. But they're there as a facilitator and as an observer, not as an active panel member. Now, our process guide allows for the possibility of a QQI staff member being on the panel, but we haven't been utilising that. Our panels are at the moment, and I think are likely to remain, comprised of external experts.
And the last question, if I may, before your re-engagement, how soon do you know beforehand who's going to be on your panel? And can you object to somebody? Thank you very much.
Is that you, Margaret?
Oh, that's me, Walter. You know I'd come up with something awkward.
So you will, when you submit your application is assigned to a member of the team to manage, and then they will contact you. They'll that when they screen your application, they'll give you screening feedback if there is any, and at that point they will also advise you of the proposed panel that has been appointed to evaluate your application. At that stage, we will request that you confirm that there's no conflicts of interest with any of those panel members of which we may not have been aware. At that stage, obviously, you should draw any conflicts to our attention. You can certainly object if you wish, and we'll consider if there's any merit or weight in your objection. But for that to have weight, typically would need there would need to have been a conflict, a serious conflict identified by you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I think it was, certainly from our point of view, it was a good session. I hope it was for you, and we look forward to doing more of these. Any feedback or suggestions as to how it might be improved or made more useful, we'd be delighted to get. So otherwise, good evening and thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. That was great.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks a million, Walter. Thanks a million, Deirdre. Karen. It's great. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.